Hi, and welcome to A Word with Kelly Scott Reed. I'm here with Jim Towns. Nice to see you. Nice to finally meet you. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Kelly, it's awesome to meet you. It's always been talking to you. Marianne, it's nice to be here with you too. Thank you so much for having me on. This is great. I'm really excited. A lot of my literary buddies and kind of folks I admire have been on the show. So now my turn is like, I'm just excited to be part of that group now. It's great.
And and I have to tell you, with the whole Twitter literary world, I've met
Hmm.
the greatest people, and there are certain
Yeah.
people online that I'm constantly commenting on, and you're one of
Hmm.
those people. You have
I
such a
appreciate that.
you have such a wide variety of interests, and I always love, and they're kind of match mine. So I'm always like, ooh, I
Yeah.
love what he said. And
Oh, that's
so
cool.
you're a writer,
Mhm.
a director.
Yes.
So what kind of things do you direct? Like, what is your
Okay.
genre?
Well, I think I've done 6 or 7 films at this point, features. I mostly focus on a lot of genre stuff. I've done a lot of horror. I've done some martial arts stuff. I'm doing more martial arts stuff coming up. I'm really branching into that kind of subgenre, which I'm really into because I have a martial arts background, so it's a lot of fun for me. Um, and I've in the last few years I've kind of gotten a lot of documentary work too, which is really, as a writer, documentary is really interesting because you're sort of filming it and then writing the story after you're filming it. It's counterintuitive, right? Because you're you're working with what you got. You can kind of have a framework, but it all depends on what whoever you're interviewing says to you, and that builds your story. So you're sort of retroactively creating your film after you've made it already. It's interesting,
And where
different
are you
from
coming?
yeah.
And when you do, I see, first of all, I love documentaries. I actually prefer them. I think the
Hmm.
truth is always stranger than fiction. I could not make up some of the stuff that I've watched. I actually just
Yeah.
watched the Margaret Mitchell documentary about her blowing in the Nixon administration,
Oh,
John
right. Oh,
Mitchell's
yeah.
wife. It was fantastic. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God, how incredibly interesting real people are. Do you have a specific
And
thing that you enjoy doing more, like documentary or fictitious directing? Would you prefer
I,
one over the other?
I do more enjoy the dramatic stuff I do because it gets to be much more of my creation up there on a screen. And I came up as a fine artist. Actually, I studied painting and illustration at Savannah College of Art and Design. Graduated there. Um, did illustration, did storyboarding, and did work like that, visual arts like that, graphics and stuff coming up, and then merged into filmmaking. So the filmmaking is really fun because I get to write the script. I get to storyboard the film, so I get to use and I usually as a director have a hands on in the art department and in the set design and stuff. So I get to use that visual sense, and then I get to direct. So I get to work with actors and everything, and then I get to edit too. So it's fun because I do get to bounce around with all the disciplines I kind of enjoy messing with. I get to do it all, and that's sort of just my fun spot there. So yeah, so it's really the dramatic stuff I've gotten to do, and more recently, really like I've gotten to a point where like the visuals I'm being able to get on screen are really making me happy, and the technology is there for me to really like realize the image that I had in my head when I wrote the thing. So it's really fun.
I think it's incredible that that you are actually doing what you love to do. I mean,
I do
for
too.
me,
Yeah, it's been a road to get here. Yeah, for sure. It's
yeah.
great though.
What kind of road was it? Like, how did you get there? Like, give us a little more background on that. I think that's so cool.
Bumpy. Okay. Well. Oh, all right. So I graduated in '96 from college, and I moved to Philadelphia for a few years, and I do some set design for stage. I moved back to Pittsburgh for a while, kind of with my tail between my legs. And this whole time I'm bartending and waiting tables and stuff to kind of earn a living and pay the rent. I moved to New York City and I lived there for about 2 years. And I do some graphic design. I worked on the Matrix website when the first Matrix movie came out. I did some illustration stuff for that early on, and it was like,
Yeah.
this is it. Here we go. And yeah, no, not so. That was it. I did move. I moved back to Pittsburgh. From about '99 till 2005. I went back to painting and I started showing in fine art galleries all over Pittsburgh and doing my painting work there. And around that time, digital filmmaking really came into being. and we were able to start creating films that looked like films on video and not on the very expensive stock of 35 millimeter, 60 millimeter, what have you. I had a friend named Mike McCown that I grew up with, and we used to shoot little horror movies in high school, like you do as a kid. The ones you start and never finish, and all that stuff. And then he and I started collaborating, and what I started trying to do was to take the aesthetic that I was doing in the painting world, where I was taking very stark, intense black and white figurative stuff, where the figures really harshly lit, with one light where the shadow parts of the figure are lost in the blackness of the background and stuff. So trying to create these kind of shapes and whatnot. And I was starting to try to apply that to my filmmaking. So I started really as an experimental filmmaker, kind of art housey, doing black and white stuff and doing pretty experimental silent films. And then we did a sort of a throwback version of back to like Nosferatu and Cabinet of Caligari, the silent German expressionist type films. We did a black and white silent horror film that got distributed, that got picked up and sold. So that was the moment where I was like, well, if I'm going to really make this filmmaking thing, I can't live in Pittsburgh. I do have to live where the filmmaking is at this point. So in 2005, I moved out to Los Angeles, and slept on couches for a while, slept in the back of movie theaters, lived in my car briefly, struggled, sold things, pawned things, lived without medical insurance for quite a while, the whole story. And you hear this around stuff. And because it takes a while, it's very rarely the overnight success you hear about. And when it is, there's normally more to the story of the overnight success than, that's not being told. It's almost, for most people, it's a road to get here. And so now I find myself here. Yeah. Since I moved to LA, so I've been out here. This is 15 years almost coming up now. And I've got like 6 or 7 projects working at one stage or the other right now, back and forth and stuff. And then and then to finish up, I did a film in 2014, this kind of father-daughter end of the world, kind of a Last of Us type story, except I did it until 2014 before Last of Us was like a thing. And that movie went through, I finished it, but it went through a very, very protracted post-production, editing, re-editing, sound, redoing the sound, music, kicking out the score, redoing the score, all the stuff like that. Kind of some toxic producer stuff and everything like that. And it just took a long time. And I'm sitting here without it, because you're only as good as your last film, right? And when you have no last film, you're kind of stuck. So that's when my wife is has a master's degree in English. She's an educator. She's a director at a community college. She and I started doing these writing prompts, and it was around that time, because I kind of have a lot of downtime at that point. It was over holidays and weekends, and we started giving each other, we would give each other like a quote and an object and like a photograph or something like that, and without whatever you give it, and that's what you had to make a story out of. And we started doing these kind of exercises, really, because she wanted to get back into writing. I wanted to go I was very deeply enmeshed in screenwriting, which is its own style and format and animal right there. And I wanted to get back into prose, but it's like I trained my writing muscles to do something very specific, and trying to retrain them to do that other thing was really, I just kept tripping over myself. It was really difficult, because in a screenplay, you write in the present tense, first of all.
Yeah.
It's screenwriting is really about they say not a lot of ink on the page, which means you're, as a screenwriter, technically you're not supposed to over describe that much stuff, because that's not your job. That's when your script is tentatively made by somebody else, that's the director's job or the filmmaker's job, is to take the blueprint you've set up and then elaborate on that. So it was a weird transition, but these little writing prompts my wife and I were doing really helped me get back into the mode of this. And I was starting to go like, okay, this is something I really want to do. It's like 2015, 16. And then 2017, I started, submitting to different, I went on horrortree.com. You guys know Horrortree? Yeah.
Yes.
And I found that one, and that seemed to the anthologies and lit mags and what have you that they were posting seemed to be up my alley. That was like, this is stuff I can write. This is cool. And I started submitting, and it took a few months or something, and then I got a story in 2017 published in it was called Fun Dead Press, and they did an anthology of all stories that take place in Salem on Halloween.
Oh, that's
And,
awesome.
yeah, of all different years and everything. Yeah. So I came at that with like, okay, and I wrote a little story about this guy coming back from the Civil War in 1865, and he makes friends with this mysterious to his ancestral home in Salem, which he has to restore now because all his family's gone. And there's this little black cat that because I'm a big cat guy too. There's a black cat that he befriends, but he's got a neighbor who hates the cat and is trying to kill the cat. And so his natural, like, soldier instincts kick in and what have you and stuff. And so that started it. And then, since then I've been just submitting everywhere and writing as much as I can and everything and getting stuff done. And then American Cryptic, my first book, which is, I guess, how do I say this? That's the documentary version. Nonfiction to me is like making a documentary, and fiction is like making a dramatic feature, right? That's how I kind of break it down. I did a book called American Cryptic, which is about Western Pennsylvania, boogeymen, ghost stories, strange things that I grew up hearing that I kind of wanted to collect and chronicle. And I got that out in 2020. And then Bloodsucker City, my first novella, came out in 2021.
That is so exciting.
Wow.
And
that was a long journey. That took me a while just to describe.
That's what I wanted to ask, because it's always interesting to me. It's always really fascinating. When I think about, we're anthology buddies, which makes me very happy.
Right on.
The latest from Anxiety and Outcast, where everyone's name is Fear, which is awesome.
Cool. Yeah, so happy to be part of that one. That was really cool.
Yeah, it's so
Sebastian
fun.
and Cody are both great.
They are, aren't they? Like,
yeah.
I was blown away. We met them through the press. Sebastian reached out for an interview. And he was like really nervous to do it because he said, these three nice ladies, I'm going to go on to this three nice ladies, and they're going to like hate me, but I'm the weirdest person on the planet. So,
because Sebastian is a little unfiltered, but no, he's a doll too. I've been on his show too. So that's great. Yeah, no, he's awesome. He's great.
Very cool. And I think about you writing, novellas. Do you have any plans to turn it into a screenplay? Because I always love the movies where the screenplay is written by the author of the actual book. That tends to be my favorite. It kind of flows better.
Kind of 1-to-1 ratio thing. Yeah, exactly. The funny part is Bloodsucker City, which is it takes place during the Great Depression in the South, and it's about a woman falsely accused of killing her own child. And she is sent to this women's prison called Steelgate in the middle of nowhere. And she starts to realize that all the wardens of Steelgate are all vampires. And they slowly are feeding off of the prisoners. They'll take a female prisoner down to solitary confinement. These are these women that nobody's going to miss. They've all been convicted of murder, and other, heinous crimes. So they've got this, buffet in front of them. And so they're slowly just feeding off them. This is how these vampires exist. That was a screenplay. That was a screenplay I was pitching around, I want to say 2000 and maybe 13 or 14 or so, something like that. And I could look up the date because it was right around the time Twilight was really like a big thing. And I'm pitching this vampire script that is very dark and very intense, and the vampires are not beautiful, and they're hideous animal type creatures. And really what I was being told was like, no, during the Twilight thing, everyone was like, it literally put the nail in the coffin, not to, mix a metaphor. Nobody was making vampire movies right then. It was done for a while, and it's come back, since then. So I had the screenplay that just wasn't doing anything. And that's when I was like, okay, what if this is the thing I adapt to my first novel? So I take that and whatever. And I will say, having written a novel or two since then, it would have been easier just to not look at the screenplay and rewrite the whole thing from scratch as prose than trying to take the screenplay format in Microsoft Word and trying to adapt it into prose format. again, because I'm saying, you have the prompts where it says like Lily says this, and then it has, and now you have to put quotes in it like that. The amount of reformatting it requires, I should have just looked at it and done it by hand. It was a nightmare. So, but I will say, so it came out, and it's now, I actually have a meeting in a week or two with a director and a writer who want to try and maybe adapt it as a streaming series. So the hilarious thing is that this thing I couldn't get made as a film then turned into a book. Now there's the potential it might get made into something. So
that's so cool. Oh my God.
Which is not surprising.
Really
it's so dumb. It's not surprising. Yeah. Thank you. It's cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh my God. All right. I've got to get onto the questions. I could just sit here all day and just literally download everything that you're saying. Could you describe in your a time in your life where you realized that language had power?
Ooh, I grew up not as the biggest kid in class, in gym class, when they inevitably line you all up from shortest to tallest. Which, why did they do that? First, when we talked about this, everyone I talked to is like, no, I know what you're talking about. Like, why is that what they teach you in phys ed education or something? Anyway, I was always like number two. I was like, I'm not always the shortest kid in class, but not the tallest. And I'm still not. I'm 5'8". I'm just not a big dude. And inevitably, growing up as a dude, you run into guys who are bigger than you, who want to assert their dominance in this, in like guerrilla fashion, because they're 6 times your size, and they can't. One thing I kind of realized was that I could think fast and speak fast, and I could be funny, or I could be kind of sharp and cutting or insulting, and I think it's probably a 1-to-1 ratio. I think my mouth got me into as much trouble as it got me out of, but maybe a little bit more. There's some occasions where it got me out of trouble faster with adults too, than I think I had a knack for it. I had a 6th grade teacher who, we always talk about that person who gave you your first push, right? And I had a 6th grade teacher named Mrs. Bowman, and we did some creative writing in that class. And Mrs. Bowman, at one point during that year, told me, like, when you write your first book, I want a copy of it, because you're going to write a book at some point. And I was like, and no one had really said something like that to me before. And I was like, wow, okay, that's neat. And sadly, I actually, when the first book came out, I looked up Miss Bowman. I don't know if she's still around anymore. I'm sorry. She was kind of older when I know.
Oh, that's sad, but that's awesome.
But I think of her. Yeah. Sometimes she is the one who's like, you're going to write a book someday. So, and it's that thing where someone almost predicted it. So now when you do it, it doesn't seem like the strangest thing, to have done it. Like, well, someone said I was going to do it, so now I did it. It makes it seem less impossible.
Oh, God, that's awesome. That's really great. For me, when I hear those stories about people and how they started, teachers are so important. The more I think about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, because one of the reasons I wanted to write is I wrote, this is ridiculous. I wrote in 8th grade, we were supposed to write about raindrops. So I turned mine into a Mr. Bill skit where the raindrop was falling and just being smashed everywhere, and it would scream, oh no. And I just did this whole ridiculous thing.
That's great though. Yeah.
And it was total plagiarism. Well, it's actually, I call it fan fiction, because
right.
I was changing the story. I'll call it fan fiction. But as I was doing it, the class reaction, and the teacher had her arms crossed and was a little agitated because it was a Catholic school. And she was like,
yeah,
I'm acting it out. I'm screaming. But afterwards she was like, you need to be on the stage, or you need to be, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, and it really inspired me to do writing so that's kind of, I love those stories. I'm sorry.
That's so cool. That's really great. No, it's very important. And I again, during this downtime I had when I wasn't getting any films made, and during a time in our country where things got a little darker after an election and what have you, there was a moment where I was like, I need to be doing something good for somebody. I don't know what. And I worked I volunteered at Boys and Girls Club for a year, teaching after school, like art and stuff, which I thought was like really, I thought it was a good thing to do. Like, I was whatever. And it was really hard. I don't think I've appreciated, and I was only doing it for like an hour and a half a day. I wasn't doing it 8 hours a day like some teachers have to, for years and years and years. Oh my God, trying to control the energy of 25 8-year-olds, get out. My
Oh
hat off.
yeah.
My hat off to anybody who does that and stuff like that. Anybody does that and then can also find those moments and inspire somebody too. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's really neat. Um, uh, how do I ask this question? How in your writing do you feel that the genre either chose you or you chose your genre? A lot of people who have more of a, because I know that people who write horror almost always write horror. They don't really
Mhm.
dabble or in other things. Did you choose your genre? Or do you feel kind of that's what you do well?
Yeah. I think there's something in my DNA that has always dragged me towards the darker stuff, and not necessarily sinister or evil or nasty. Because I mean, I write horror, but I feel like I kind of write optimistic horror. I think I write positive terror stuff. It's hard to coin a phrase. It's not. I mean, I do write violence, and I do have violence in my films and whatnot. But it was very early on, and it's not a common thing in my family. My family are all engineers, physicists, architects. For me to be just a creative entity itself is a different thing for my family. I'm a bit of an oddball anyway. Um, but then this early obsession with old Universal monsters and monster makeup and the darker side of literature, Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson and whatnot. It set in and didn't let go. So when I talk about horror, what I tend to say is, it's all a metaphor, right? Horror is in a lot of genre writing is a thing where you can say things through the metaphor of what you're talking about without saying them outright, and in doing that um, you get to cushion the blow a little bit. If if you if you're telling a vampire story, um, the vampires can represent so many things that you want them to represent, and you can talk about bloodborne disease. You can talk about sexual predation. You can talk about all these kind of things that if you write about directly, it's hard to make that palatable for an audience. But if you allude to it through this constructive this construction that you've created, it really does it. And I also think that horror and we see so many and the female following of horror in the last 10-15 years has erupted in a way that it did not exist when I was a younger guy, and it's so cool. But I think it has a lot to do with in horror especially. There's this idea that if you can, because bad things happen without warning and without reason, right? We were just talking about like real life and how bizarre real life actually is, that you can't even write that stuff and whatever. But in real life, people get killed by drunk drivers or drive-by shootings, or kids get sick and die. Awful things happen. They don't have a purpose, and there's no escape. In horror, you create this idea that if you can just run fast enough, duck at the right time, go right instead of left, that you have some kind of control over your own fate. And that's so comforting in the midst of something hideous happening. It's a lie, but it's a wonderful lie that we keep telling ourselves that we have that control over our own fate, as opposed to the world where we live in, right?
I that is so funny you're saying this. I always say this to my husband, that what theater, what writing does is it allows us to play in a safe space with the
Mm-hmm.
scary things or the
Yes.
controversial things. And you can
Yeah.
do this you can explore things where it's seemingly entertainment, but it's really doing something for you psychologically,
Yeah.
and how we can deal. Like, joking. I love West Side Story. It's like my favorite
Yeah.
thing in the whole world. My kids used to watch it on Saturday mornings. Like, I don't know why, but I think when I was younger, those conflicts, you wrestle with the conflicts that were, what if I fall in love with someone unsavory to my family? That kind
Right. Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
they're wrong and they're so wrong, and And
you
it
can put
seems
yourself
that,
in the position of the character and try and think, what
yes,
would I do? How would I deal with this situation? Would I get myself in this situation in the first place? Right.
exactly. And I just watching horror and because I love it. Oh, speaking of, did you ever see you had to have seen American Movie,
Yes.
the
Oh,
documentary?
that hit hard at a time where my friend that I was telling you about that I made my early films with actually had a paper route. He was a grown up with a paper route.
I
No
can't
kidding.
even tell
And
you.
we were making a horror movie, and this movie came out, and we just went like, "That's a
It
little
was
close
it,
to home." I'm not
it's
sure.
literally my favorite movie of all time. Like
Yeah.
I am
Oh,
obsessed with it because I love Mark Borchardt. I loved, Mike Shank. I love those people.
Mike Shank
Um,
just died, didn't he?
yes, he
He
did.
just passed away.
Oh,
I saw that. That was heartbreaking. I felt so bad about that.
before Thanksgiving, we were going to do a marathon of with my kids watching American Movie because they
Mhm.
love it too, and like in honor
Yeah.
of the hymn. So yeah, but I think about when you were talking about your friend and you guys making movies together, um, and
Yeah.
I don't know why I diverged from what we were saying, but I just wanted to make sure I got that in because you
Right.
were reminding me of that.
No, and I
Um,
love that guy's become a bit of like a cultural icon too. Like it's
mhm,
so interesting how I remember watching, I don't know what channel it was, but it's maybe I want to say it was TCM or something on Halloween. And then those two guys were hosting a bunch of movies. And I think they were showing Night of the Living Dead, the Romero film,
mhm,
which was filmed in
mhm,
Pittsburgh. So obviously there's a bit of a connection here. Um,
mhm.
uh, and then they had TCM or whoever had produced the show had let Mark and the other guy go out and like film their own version of it in Evans Cemetery, which was where they shot the first scenes in the original films. And like that was just that guy. Um, that's the other thing is I do think genre entertainment is a home for a lot of people who don't fit in elsewhere,
Mhm,
and it's embracing to people who maybe don't feel like an outcast.
mhm.
You can be part of a little family because you like the same things other people like. You're united by that, and you may disagree politically, you may disagree with other what have you, but you're united by I love Star Wars or I love this or I love
Mhm.
Pokemon or My Little Pony or whatever. It does none of it matter. It doesn't matter what it
Right,
is, right? It's
right.
the fact that this thing we all adore or grew up loving together or whatever binds us together.
Oh, that's so beautiful. It really
Yeah.
is. Um, do you have any characters that you identify with, like in literature or just in general? Like, because we write characters, I believe it's probably not for everybody. Some part of us is in every little character. We can't help it. We're our own
Hmm.
minds. Are there
Yeah.
any characters either that you write or that you have read in literature that you really identify with?
Oh well, I would agree with what you just said, Kelly. Is like I think I think when you write any character, you're putting part of you into that character, and that's hopefully what makes whatever you write kind of cohesive. Is there's a through line, right? That
Mhm.
even if like your story in the most recent anthology, uh, it was about a male character, which I thought was interesting because I've written female characters, and there's always, as especially currently in the climate we're in, as a guy, you want to be very careful how you're writing a female character, right? As and you want to be
Yeah.
correct, but you because you see the bad examples, you see the people post the paragraphs of guys writing female characters where you go like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
have you actually met a woman? Have you actually ever?
Yeah.
Uh, um, yeah, wow. So that's a challenging thing. When I wrote Bloodsucker City, the main character protagonist is a female. So when I read yours, I was like, I can't remember the last time I read. I mean, I know I have, but it was like I'm trying to remember the last time I read something where a woman wrote a male character that aggressively. It was interesting. You're kind of inside that. It was really interesting.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's
Yeah,
funny because those are kind of all based, the little vignettes of the devil and him meeting are all
yeah.
based on men in my family. So
Oh,
I'm sending it out there now. Those horrible
that's
stories actually have
ooh,
happened.
wow, jeez.
So I was like, all right, these are normal, everyday people that are
Hmm.
wonderful on so many levels. Every single person written out there has
Yeah,
gone and done things differently. But I don't know why I wrote in a male voice. And I don't know why. I don't know if
yeah.
it was any good. But
No, it's wonderful. Yeah. But yeah.
it was kind of like the member, I was talking
Mm,
about men in my family, so I kind of was taking on their voice. They're
that's
all pretty,
very interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
I think
Oh,
I do
thanks
that
for
too. I
mentioning.
think if I do write a female character, I'm basing. I mean, if I write any character, I am basing it on somebody, that obviously that I know, and and obviously channeling some of myself into it. My trick is really, and we're veering away from your question.
It's
I'm sorry, but
okay. This is
um,
loose.
my 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 trick writing anytime any type of character is just to write the person and not write the gender or the race or the what have you, right? I mean, I think that's the only thing you can do is to find a character. And yeah, there's probably templates that you're at least bouncing off of people or people you've seen or read about her. um um but you can't try to write like I'm going to write like this type of person, because then you're going to fall easily into the stereotype and all the traps and all the tropes and everything. So yeah, and I do, because I write a lot of female protagonists in my film work. I think, let me see, House of Bad had 3 female characters, State of Desolation had 1 female character, Beast Inside has, but yeah. I mean, honestly, I've had female protagonists in my last 4 films. That's interesting.
That's awesome.
And well, and that is something I enjoy doing, but I will say it's easier to get a film made with a actress a lot of times than an actor, like especially in the horror genre. And the horror genre is it's all about the final girl, right? I mean, we've since say the 80s or so, since late 70s Halloween. Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to get back to you about literary characters I identify with. That'd be interesting. Because when you're young, you're always like, I'm Holden Caulfield, or I'm,
Yeah.
Then you get older, and you're like, I'm not sure I want to be Holden Caulfield.
I identify most with Cujo, so there's that. I don't know what that says about me. I don't know what that means.
That needs to be on the banner of your Twitter feed.
I identify with Cujo in literature.
Cujo. Yeah. I also run a podcast. I had the Borgo Pass Horror Podcast, and we, going back to my beginnings, we focus mainly on horror of the 30s and 40s, mostly Universal stuff: Frankenstein, Dracula, Wolfman, Creature from Black Lagoon, all that fun stuff. So we do 2-3 hour episodes on a film that's 70 minutes long. My co-host and I have guest co-hosts and stuff. We've over 50 episodes. We've been doing it for 2 years. It's great. It's a labor of love. I make
can I get it on Apple?
It's on Apple Podcasts. Oh yeah. They're very deep dives. They're very, I like to think, scholarly analyses of a lot of some big name films, but some films that I don't think anyone's really done a really thoughtful analysis of Man-Made Monster from 1941. They're not films that have been taken that seriously, but we really get into the gist of and stuff like that. And a lot of what I
again. What is it again?
The Borgo Pass Horror Podcast. Borgo Pass is where the carriage drops Jonathan Harker off in Bram Stoker's Dracula when he's headed to Dracula's castle. So that's where it comes from. But what was I trying to get? I wanted to plug it. But there was a reason I was plugging, and I swear I had a good segue. No, but we talk a lot about the gender norms of that era and the things that seem antiquated from that era versus how you would make films now. And I try to approach it from the perspective of being a filmmaker and trying to understand, there's X amount of information about these films from almost 80 years ago now, and beyond that you can only go with inference. It's like, well, I feel like here's what they were trying to go for, and given the limitations of the time and stuff. So, but
I love that.
But yeah, but again, those are my horror. I mean, I grew up watching that stuff. I watched Friday the 13th and Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street when I was a kid. But I think some of the older stuff imprinted on me more, and maybe that colored my the way I approach storytelling, especially in character.
I think the rawness of the old ones, it seems real because no one's trying to make it look good. I think that's why, to me, they probably thought that it looked good. And maybe at the time it did. But when I watch it, it feels so authentic to me that I'm like, this is real. This doesn't feel stylized or computer generated. So it gets it hits differently for me, I think, a little bit.
it's a Sam Fuller quote. The director who did the Big Red one, he said, who came up doing black and white stuff. He said, reality is in black and white, or reality is in color, but black and white seems more realistic.
Mm.
And I always think that's such a, I was on my Twitter banner for a little bit there, which I like the idea. There's something about black and white. I do think that like it takes away a lot of the distraction that color brings. And what you're basically seeing is shape and movement. And I think it's really great. I would love to do another black and white film one of these days. My first one was black and white. It's a tough pitch to make a black and white film, but I'd love to one day.
A Girl Walks Home Alone.
There you go. Yeah,
is one of my favorite movies also ever. Like this is someone we'll revisit with the kids all the time. But that again, like you're saying, it was gorgeous. I mean, it was a beautiful movie. Yeah. But that's why I loved that black and white. That's what I love. One of the best parts of it. I'm just talking your ear off.
You film in color. Yeah, ironically now you film in color and then you take the color away in post now. Like no one films in black. There's not even such a thing as filming in black and white anymore. It's all, because as my cinematographer said to me on one of the last films, he's like, look, the camera now is it's a computer with a lens attached to it. That's what we're doing nowadays, and you have to get past the idea of this is a mechanical object. It's really a computer, and we're dealing with data. And we want to romanticize the art of filmmaking, and I think it's easy to think about film negative and editing and splicing and the tactile nature of it and developing and all that stuff. And I came up through shooting 35mm photography. As well. So that was, that was a transition for me when I went over to digital. What you lose in romanticism, you do gain in versatility now with digital. I will say that. So and as someone who came up filmmaking, at least all the way through digital, I've never shot anything on film, like film wise and stuff. I'd like to someday, but it's fun. But
we're from Kodak land. We're from Rochester.
Oh, neat! Wow, yeah.
So when we're talking, like we go to George Eastman House all the time. Actually, it's one of our little outings we're going to do
very
shortly. Cool. But where we're from, Kodak's here, so that film was like ultra important, like for us growing up. So when we started to see them move away, first of all, they didn't move in time. They were managed very poorly. But to have
holding on,
things going is so weird for us up here, because it's like, what? It's not gonna be on film, and it's pretty great, the new stuff.
I have a cousin who shoots only he shoots like wet plate photography. He's like getting his doctorate from Notre Dame, and like he shoots the same way they shot in like the 1880s and stuff. And so many old film professors have just given him their equipment. He has like rooms of equipment now because everyone wants it kept safe, but no one has room for it and everything like that. So it's what I say, like, I think, an outmoded technology just becomes an art form now, because it doesn't have no one's going to a crime scene as a investigative journalist and taking a wet plate photography. It's not, that's not what you would do. No one's like doing the Reinhold or doing the Ouija thing, like whatever. But that sets it up to become an art form, and that's just what 35mm become, and film and everything. Yeah.
I'm so glad we got this chance to talk. I could literally probably be here all day. This was so fun. I would love to talk to you again sometime. Seriously.
We should do that.
The conversation
we should definitely do that.
Going.
Oh, I'd love to. Anytime. Of course. That'd be greght.
Are you plugging anything? Is there anything you have coming out? Yes.
Thank you, because I always forget that part. I'll end the interview and be like, oh, I was supposed to talk about all that stuff. Okay, yeah, I have a few things. I did a film at the end of last year, 2021 now, because we're in 23, called The Beast Inside. It's an exorcism film. It's about a woman who is possessed and no one believes her, and she's forced to go move into a cheap hotel and exercise herself. And it's another story I kind of started writing as a novel, and went, I think this has more. And then actually my actress Sadie Katz and co-producer Sadie Katz approached me and said, I'm thinking about doing this film, and I want to do it. It's about this woman who's possessed, no one believes her and stuff. And I was like, I wrote 60 pages of that. Like, let's do it. I mean, because I've got it a third written already. Yeah, exactly. So definitely it's me. But that was really fun, and I was really excited I got together a bunch of people I worked with on one of my first solo features, House of Bad, in 2012. I'm so happy with it. It's coming out, I think, in around Halloween, and it might be coming out on Hulu as an exclusive. It might be coming out somewhere else. I'm not sure. It's up in the air. But yeah, I'm really happy about The Beast Inside. I'm happy with that. And then speaking of Anxiety Press and Cody Sexton, my second novella is coming out sometime this year through Anxiety Press. Cody and I have been talking about it a while. It's called Braddock's Falls. And talk about, okay, this was something that I also started writing years and years ago, possibly as a film. And it's about a serial killer who's hunting in a nudist colony in Western Pennsylvania in the 90s. Because again, if we're talking about horror, you do have to at some point touch on the idea of nudity. And to me, in my films especially, but then the writing too, to me, nudity has always been about vulnerability more than sexuality, right? It's about you. It's about a person in a very vulnerable state, no matter what is happening. And I thought, like, well, who would be more vulnerable than a bunch of people to nudist colony if someone's running around, a homicidal maniac's running around and stuff. So, but there was definitely a point where I realized, like, this is not going to be a film. Like, there's no way in 2020 whatever that you're making this a movie, and no one's funding this movie, no one is distributing this movie. This is as they say, this is unfilmable. And that's when it made the jump into being a book. Yeah. And I worked on it through most of 2021, and then had a great conversation. Cody put out this story called The Chew I wrote during the pandemic in like 2021. It was the only thing I wrote that sort of touched on the pandemic. It's about a guy during the lockdown in LA who has, and I'm blanking on the name of the phobia, where you can't stand the sound of people chewing. That everyone talks about. Know. Yeah. But it's to the point where he can't stand the sound of himself chewing, and he's slowly starving while he's locked down during the pandemic of the thing. And I couldn't get that. No one would publish that story. I sent that out everywhere. And then Cody was like, oh, I'll publish this. This is awesome. So we started having a great relationship. Of course, I did the story for The Place Where Everyone's Name is Fear, for him and Sebastian. And then he and I had a conversation about the book and stuff. And he's like, well, let's talk about 2023. Let's do it. So it's called Braddock's Falls, and it's coming out sometime this year.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to read it, because horror is my favorite. And I'm super excited for you. That's really great stuff coming up. Really,
this is a visceral one. Thank you. Yeah. There's chainsaws in the nudist colony. It's just it's gritty. It's got some yeah.
It's got teeth to it. So good.
Yeah. And then the only other thing I'm shooting a witch movie this year. I've never, as far I've messed around with I've done a film with ghosts. I've done a film with zombies. I've done a movie with exorcism. Now I'm all touching on all those little sub genres. But I told myself I was never going to do a witch movie unless I had a really good idea for it, because I'm not directly descended, but I have an ancestor named Rebecca Nurse who was hung in Salem for witchcraft. She was one of the last people killed during the witch hunt in Salem. She was very old. She was blind and mostly deaf, or deaf and mostly blind, one of those two things. And
I absolutely know who you're talking about. I've heard podcasts about it.
Yeah. I don't know. And so much more is known from, I remember my family telling me about her when I was young and going, this is interesting. And you couldn't find almost anything about it. In more recent years, I'm reading a great book called The Devil's Snare right now. I can't remember the author's name at the moment, but it's a real good analysis on the Salem witch hunt and how it was kind of all about property and being able to take your cousin's property if you accuse them of being a witch, more or less, and stuff like that. So I told myself that I'm never going to, I sort of owe it to my forebears to like get a story right. If I'm not going to do something where a witch is the monster, because that's not my belief. And I think that's kind of a cheap way to do it. And then I did discover a story that is rooted in Western Pennsylvania history, about this character named Moll Derry, who was a well-known witch in the late 1700s or so. And I kind of found it in. So yeah, I'm doing a thing tentatively called The Witch of the Western River. We're shooting sometime in 2023 as well.
Woo! That was
cool.
Holy cow! I'm so excited for you. I'm excited.
Thank you.
into just delve into all the stuff. I was actually on your website going through
Oh, cool.
some of the writing, going back, just to get a more of a vibe. And oh my gosh, it's right up my alley. I absolutely love it. There was one.
It's turned out to be a lot of stuff now. It's
Oh
cool.
yeah, a lot of stuff.
I'm sorry, you're saying? Sorry.
Nothing. I just loved. I was just like, I can't remember the name of the one I was
Cool.
looking at, but I was like, oh my god! And I did see the chew on the website.
Yeah, the shoes there, and so is Kaijo, which you guys
yes,
printed last year. Yeah, it was so cool.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate all this time that you've given us. This has been really fun.
I appreciate you guys. I appreciate what you guys do. I love checking out when you guys post, like, you have new stuff up on your website and stuff like that. It's really fun. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. Thanks.